Hey, hi everybody. It is 1:01, so we're gonna give everybody a couple minutes to keep signing on, and we'll probably get started at around 5 after. So just give us a couple minutes, but thank you for joining. And if everyone could do me a favor and just let us know that you can hear us. If you let us know that you're here in the questions, that everything's working great. I know I said this last week, but this is only my third one of these, so I'm not immune to technical difficulties. I just want to make sure everyone is able to hear us, see us, and everything's good to go.
You're a pro
And
now.
I don't know about that. You guys are seeing good to go from Devin. Okay, awesome. Oh, Ryan, Devin is your partner, right?
He is, yeah.
Okay. Love
Apparently,
it.
he's got a crowd with him watching, so no pressure.
That's awesome.
A small crowd, I should say, practicing proper social distancing.
Yeah, better be
There you go. 6 feet apart.
Yeah, you better be.
Yeah.
All right, good feedback. Everyone says they can hear. Alyssa says, hey, y'all. Give it a couple more minutes. I still see some people trickling in. Blake is in attendance as well.
Hey, Mr.
Our
Blake.
biggest fan.
Hi, Blakey.
He's waving. He raised his hand, whatever that means.
You can see him?
No,
Like
I can't see him this time.
Like within the software, or like actually raised his hand?
No, like within the software, like you can press raise hand.
Okay.
So I just keep seeing like this green hand next to Blake's hand, next to Blake's name. He said he raised his hand to wave. I knew it. I knew that's what you were doing. And Josh is on the call too. Josh Shine.
Josh Shine.
I said that name correctly. He's waving now too.
Glad you can join us with your busy schedule, Mr. Shine.
All right, it's 1:04. We'll give it like one more minute and then we can jump right in.
While everybody's waiting, I think we should take this opportunity to plug our event on Thursday.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Great minds think alike.
Oh yeah, okay. Anybody who's listening, we are having a really special webinar on Thursday. So today's the 14th, that's the 16th. It's going to be at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. And this webinar is going to be called Conquering a Crisis. And it's a really candid inside look with the CR behind CR of Maryland. So a lot of times we get the question of what CR stands for, and for those of you who might not know, that is our owner and president's initials, Mr. Craig Rich, and we have gotten him to speak on this Thursday, and he's going to talk about the ways that CR of Maryland is handling everything that's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's going to be really awesome. So if you have any questions or
I'll be co-starring also, so you can come watch me also.
Oh.
Jean will also be there. Jean
Cool.
and Craig, an inside look. All right, it's 1:05. So Pam, you want to go ahead and get started?
Let's roll.
Absolutely. Let's get started. So welcome. Hi, guys, again. Thank you so much for joining us. We're having a lot of fun with these CR Tuesday tips, and I hope you're finding it useful. Also wanted to say really quick, if you have any ideas for, what topics you want to see covered, please let us know. I'll get that all together for all of us. But for those of you that don't know, I'm Pam Astoria, CR of Maryland's retail team. And again, this format over here for our Tuesday tips is just to, have an open format, really just like a conversation. We pick a topic, we have a guest speaker, And this week on our agenda, we have with us Ryan Staton with Staton Walsh Financial Services. And today he's going to be going over estate planning. So he's going to go over the basics of estate planning, how to own, protect, and eventually transition your assets on your own terms, tax consideration, building a team of experts to help you navigate through your investment. So he's going to, cover all of that. But again, if you have any questions as we're going through anything, you can just go ahead and send them over, and Laura has access to that. So she'll, jump in and ask the questions as we're going through it. So very laid back format. So let's get started. I want to welcome Ryan Staton. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, how are you?
Great. So you can just go ahead, jump right in, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about estate planning.
Sure. So for those on the call who don't know who I am Ryan Staton. I'm with Staton Walsh. We are a financial planning and insurance brokerage. We're located here in the Baltimore, Maryland area. We are a comprehensive financial planning operation. That means a lot to a lot of our clients. We do pretty much anything under the sun financially related on a consultative basis. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about specifics in real estate, more specifically real estate investing, and also how that kind of ties into estate planning. So our firm, and some of this will show up on the next slide, but we can kind of breeze through these quickly. Our firm works with a lot of business owners as well as other members of the community that either own real estate, invest in real estate. And so this is actually an area of focus for us in our practice. We have a pretty unique understanding of how to navigate this journey, this financial journey that is real estate investing, and how to properly position clients to be able to buy, own, and then eventually transfer that asset as well as other assets on an efficient basis. So those are some of the things. We're just going to share some tips today and some considerations for the people that are on the call so that everyone has a good understanding of questions they can be asking or other professionals that maybe they should consult when deciding whether or not to go down this path. So we can go to the next slide. So we'll just start with the basics. So what is estate planning? By definition, estate planning is the practice of anticipating, arranging during the course of a person's life, decision-making, the management and disposal of assets while you're alive, and then also what happens after death. And it's a process centered around how can we efficiently transfer things that we own to the people that we want to own them after us, while also minimizing potential tax implications, generation skipping transfers, and the like. So the big question that we always get is, who needs estate planning? We have clients that come to us from time to time and they say estate planning is for people who are really, really wealthy. The reality is that all of us need estate planning. Anyone who has any kind of ownership of assets, whether it's just you, your spouse, children living in your house, and your house is the largest asset that you own, estate planning is warranted for you as well. Now, depending on each person's individual situation, the complexity, how simple and straightforward it is versus how many layers there are to estate planning can change based on what you have going on in your financial life. But ultimately, and one thing that's included in estate planning are things like advanced directives. The reason why I mention that is we're seeing it a lot today with stuff that's going on in the world with COVID-19. Being able, in the event that you are incapacitated and can't make decisions for yourself, having legal documentation in place that clearly states who has the ability to make those decisions on your behalf. So that's one element of it. And then the last piece is the actual process to figuring out how to build an estate plan. This process involves several different people. It's going to involve people like ourselves, financial advisors, CPAs, attorneys. All of those professionals usually are working together to come up with a plan based on their own areas of expertise that accomplish all the goals that you set forth when we're all meeting together and talking about what you want to see happen with your estate and the things that you own under any circumstance. So the next slide. So switching gears to kind of a more a deeper focus on real estate investing and how that journey starts, finishes, and how estate planning plays into that. So there's 3 simple, straightforward steps to real estate investing. There's your purchase. You can either pay cash for the home or you can finance it. Last week, we heard a great presentation from Absolute Home Mortgage and Trias Lending about different ways that you can finance your purchases and different programs that are out there. But those are really the 2 avenues that you can go down when purchasing. The second step is ultimately you buy your home, you get a tenant in there, you maybe use someone like CR to help with the property management, and now you're realizing cash flow. You have your rental income, net at your expenses, and that's what you get to take home and then ultimately use in your personal life or to potentially expand your real estate investment portfolio. And then the third step is the inevitable sale and transfer. Why I say that it's inevitable is that people can own that real estate over the course of their life, but at some point we all die. Not to morbid conversation, but the reality is nobody lives forever. And so understanding how that asset can be transferred efficiently to the next generation or to charity or wherever you want to see that go. Being able to do that in the form of a liquidation or transfer is an important step in the process. So next slide. So I'm not going to get into a ton of detail on this because these are all, I want to preface this by saying this is all case by case basis. However, for the purpose of educating people that are on the call, here are some different ways that we can own real estate investments and investments in general. Probably the most straightforward structure is personal ownership. That would be you going out, purchasing the home, you secure the financing yourself, and then you own that asset in your name personally. It's probably the cheapest, like I said, and easiest way to get into real estate investment. However, there are some positives and negatives to that structure when we're talking about creditor protection, liability, things like that. The next is a trust. So that's legal documentation that can be set up for ownership of the home. That can be either revocable or irrevocable. The differences between those two all center around the level of control that you want to have over that asset. Revocable is just as it reads, you can take it back. You put that trust in place, but you still have control and ownership over the property. At any point in time, you can change the provisions of that or remove that trust. Irrevocable, on the other hand, is something that once it's done, it's done. You cannot unravel that. It's possible to do, but it's very challenging in the legal world. And there are a couple different reasons to do both. Trusts in general, the biggest benefit of that is avoiding probate. Why that's important to some people is that there are some families out there that prefer privacy when you're talking about financial matters. And so being able to pass an asset to the next generation without having to disclose it publicly is something that a trust can achieve. And then the last method is a more formal business-like path, which is owning the home in a limited liability company or LLC. That is where you formalize it, you become an owner of an LLC, you have additional protections as a business now with that home, and it has some of the positives of the trust as well. Some of the positives of personal ownership, but I will say it's probably the most complex and most expensive route to go. But if you have aspirations of doing this more than once and on a consistent basis, it's probably something to take into consideration. So those are kind of just a high level overview of this.
What is the process to obtain an LLC? Is that something that's...
So it's going to require drawing up. You're going to have to basically have a charter, corporate charter, articles of incorporation. That happens in each state. So if you're in Maryland, for example, you can get an LLC registered in Maryland. The cost of doing so is not necessarily steep. However, you do have to pay to maintain that every year. So there's a cost associated with doing that. It's usually around a few $100. If you're going to own property within an LLC, you can either have individual ones for each one, or you can have package homes into one. So depending on how it's structured, it can be cost effective, but in most circumstances, you're probably going to have an attorney on the front end to draw up legal documentation, which carries a cost. That could be anywhere from, $500 to $3,000 potentially, depending on what type of attorney you use and their cost. You have to pay for the LLC, and then you have to pay to maintain the LLC. You're probably going to have to pay an accountant, which most people probably would do anyway with real estate investing, to maintain tax documentation for the LLC too. So there's a lot more layers to it. But like I said, if someone wants to go deeper into, maybe they're anticipating having 5, 10, 20 of these homes at some point in time, there are ways with the LLC structure to do that efficiently and effectively. And it might, over time, the cost of doing that kind of diminishes because you have more cash flow coming in from your investments. So that's where it kind of starts to make a little bit more sense for the average investor.
Great.
So next slide. So this kind of goes into step 2, which is now we've realized our cash flow, and it's important to understand that now we have money coming in. We want to protect that cash flow and preserve that monthly income that we're now achieving. And so there's a couple different considerations that we have to take when looking at how we protect our cash flow. First and foremost, when you become a landlord, you now have additional liability. You have people that you don't necessarily know, other than maybe a basic credit and background check, living in your home. And you have less control over what happens. So having proper liability protection is extremely important. And that can be achieved in 2 ways. Ownership structure protects liability in a couple different ways from, for example, creditor protection. So if you structure it properly, what happens with that home specifically may not affect any of your other assets. So separating the two and maybe keeping your investments and your personal money from being commingled in the event that you were sued or had a creditor come for additional money. So not wrapping your investment up in that, as well as your insurances. So that's your typical liability insurances that your property and casualty agent can help secure for you. There are differences between personal homeowners insurance and being a rental property. So having the right professional in that space is extremely important as well. Contingency planning. So that has to do with transfer, and this goes back to our original conversation about pre-planning and estate planning, is that having a plan in place in the event that you no longer have the capacity to make decisions on what happens with this property, whether it's you're mentally or physically incapacitated, or in untimely death scenario where now your family owns this asset and they need to know what they should be doing with it and how that transfer occurs. So contingency planning is extremely important. Sometimes you can get yourself into a bind, especially if you don't have this in place, and it's not as simple as passing to your wife or children. Things can get the water can get a little muddy, I guess, so to speak. So you need to make sure that no matter what circumstance you're in, you have a contingency in place to ensure that all the work that you've done to build this and to start making money off of this investment isn't diminished by the fact that something occurs that derails the whole plan. The last piece is keeping as much as possible. So the obvious one with that is taxes, mitigating your tax implications of owning, transferring, whether it's sale or giving to the next generation. There's a ton of different strategies that you can use for that. Again, I guess it's important to say that there's no one right answer. It's definitely on a case-by-case basis, especially for those that are doing real estate investing specifically as a complement to things that you have going on in your life. So looking at the big picture, seeing how things complement one another, and make sure that you're not doing something with this particular part of your investment portfolio that you would kind of wash out any benefits that you're getting somewhere else. And then enhanced leveraging and financing opportunities. As you grow your portfolio, you will find that you will have a lot more leverage with some of the financing opportunities that you have, as well as maybe even doing some of your own funding for future real estate investments as well. And that again gets into conversations that we have on individual basis with clients. So going to the next slide. So here's the big one, Uncle Sam, friend or foe? A little bit of both. So when we talk about real estate investing, one thing that most people are aware of is depreciation and depreciation schedules over the life of owning real estate can be a very helpful tool to reduce taxation during ownership. However, I always like to preface that with saying when Uncle Sam gives you something, there's no such thing as a freebie. There's always a catch. When you own rental real estate, especially, and you're depreciating that asset, that comes with the understanding that at any point in time, if you want to sell it for a profit, that depreciation will come back into play in some way, shape, or form, which could create a taxable liability for you. Now, there's ways to avoid that. I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. I know that you had someone talking on 1031 exchanges and some other things in future presentations, but know that it's something that can greatly benefit you. It can also hurt you if you don't do the proper planning. So ties back into our original point of having the right professionals around you to help you navigate this journey. The next is efficient transfers. So properly planning for transferring the asset so that you can take advantage of some other tax benefits that are out there for you. For example, transferring within your own family from parent to child, you can actually avoid that depreciation recapture. You get something called a step up in cost basis. Conversation to have with people like ourselves and your accountant, but that can be a really efficient transfer of wealth to the next generation. So that's where we get into conversations about, do we buy and hold for not just your life, but maybe the next generation's life as well, and how do you structure that to avoid any potential tax implications. Estate taxes are a big one. They don't feel like a big one right now because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed. It raised the federal estate tax limit to $11.58 million per person and $23.16 per couple. However, it's important to understand that anything that you own personally that is perceived that you have control or ownership of all gets calculated into your estate. That's cash, real estate, investment portfolio, personally owned life insurance, and a number of other things. Why that's important is that at the end of 2025, that rule actually sunsets, meaning it goes away, and the federal estate tax level actually gets cut in half and reverts back to the original level before that was passed. So if you, over the next 5+ years, amount a large real estate investment portfolio, you could potentially be somewhere around that limit at a federal level as well as a state level. So it's just something to take into consideration. It's not necessarily a problem. It's just something that you need to know exists, and you need to work with your other professionals to make sure that you're keeping an accounting of where you stand with that number. And then knowing your state tax codes. Each state has different estate and inheritance tax rules. Some have one or the other. Maryland is one of those funny states that actually happens to have both. And the Maryland limits for estate taxes are actually lower at $5 million per person and $10 million per couple. So making sure that we're planning, keeping that in mind as you're building net worth in general, not just from a real estate perspective. So we can go to the next slide. So I just want to quickly summarize all of what we talked about. And I know I breezed through a lot of things, technical topics in a pretty quick fashion. But I do just want to quickly summarize the important points that I want everyone to take away from this presentation. First and foremost, it's build your team of experts. I put some logos up there, some other people that have been on this call, that will be on this call in the future. I apologize if I left anybody out. These people are going to be vital to your success. if you want to navigate this journey, whether it's real estate investing, buying a home personally, anything that involves a large financial decision, the important thing to know is that you need to find the right people. It's going to be a team approach. No one person is going to be able to give you all the answers. But if you can surround yourself with the right people, the chances of your success go up greatly. So I want to give a plug to some of the other people that have talked and that will talk, because I think they all do a really good job in their areas of expertise. The second is preparing legal documentation. Pre-planning is key to success in any type of investment, especially in real estate investment. You want to plan for how you're going to own, how you're going to invest, eventually transfer it, so that you can help create and then ultimately preserve the multi-generational wealth that I think everyone in this country kind of strives for. And then the third piece is protection. I can't stress that enough. Not only protecting your investment, but more importantly, protecting yourself. There are a lot of things out there in the world that can diminish our wealth building potential. And we live in a litigious society, meaning that people are willing to sue for anything and everything that they can. And so you need to protect your investments, obviously, but more importantly, make sure that you're properly protected across the board, legally, from an insurance perspective, from a financial perspective. Very, very important. And the last is diversification, diversify. Not all investments are created equal. That's important to understand. And that's even true in real estate investing, making sure that you own. And I think CR is pretty good from what I've found with their ability to find different properties, different areas, different, they take into or picking. And so the same is true for investing as it would investing in real estate as it would be for any other traditional investment portfolio, just like we're talking to our clients about with their traditional investments. So diversification is key. If you follow those 4 steps and you find the right people to help implement all of that, I think that most people will see a lot of success in this process. So that's it for me. Some quick legal disclosures, who I am, who I represent. I have to say that we technically, because I'm not a licensed CPA or attorney, I do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Know enough to be dangerous, but don't take anything I say to the bank. If you're going to consult some people, consult experts, consult CPAs, attorneys. When we're talking about financial topics, that's where we come in and provide our expertise and put our stamp of approval. And so everybody has their own individual situation, but we're happy to help wherever we can. That's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to me or my partner, Devin, who's also on this call. You can find more about us on our website. So with that, that's all I have for today. So let me know if there are any questions.
The first question that we have is from Blake. It says, "Great job, Ryan," with a bunch of exclamation points.
Blake's bias. Give me a hard question.
We do have one actually, and it's when should someone start consulting either your company or another financial? Is it sort of at a certain age? Is it when they have a certain amount of assets?
So every financial advisor is different. I'll speak from our perspective. We tell people that the minute you're ready to start having conversations about money and financial planning, that you should come meet with us. We offer free consultations to people from all walks of life, initial consultations, and we have a model that I think is very unique in that we can usually, regardless of if people have a certain amount of assets or are making a certain amount of money, we try to find ways to help any way that we can. We don't require that you have anything in particular. What we say is that we want people that obviously want our help and want to be engaged in that process. And so I would recommend to all people that even if you think you just have basic, simple questions, whether it's us or another financial advisor that you may know, go have a meeting, have a sit down and see if it's something that would be valuable for you at this particular point in time, because we can all, I think we can all use advice and we can all use help, regardless of what our current situation is. And you don't know, you might find that there's people out there that might be willing and able to help when you think you might not be an ideal client for them. So I would say
Awesome. Pam, did you have some from before? I'm sorry.
No, he answered my question with the LLC. And I guess I had a follow up with that. You can own more than one LLC, you mentioned, right?
so you can. So I don't want to get overly technical with this, but in that world, there's something called the most efficient structure, if you're going to own a lot of different properties in the LLC fashion, is called a series LLC. Essentially, you have one master company, and then you can have a bunch of sub companies underneath of that where you can actually individually wrap a home. So if you, for example, if you have an LLC and you buy 50 homes in that LLC, all 50 of those homes can be exposed to something that happens with one of the other properties. So if you have a series LLC, it gives each home its individual liability protection and a wrapper, but it all falls under sort of like a parent company structure. That takes you have to work with the right attorney to get that done properly. I will say it's not cheap to do, but if you have aspirations of owning a lot of these types of homes, it's a really good, efficient structure to accomplish individual liability protection, sort of individual ownership, while not having to create potentially 50 different LLCs, for example. So that is one structure, but you can do multiple. If you're only going to do a handful, then maybe that's maybe the traditional, just creating each new LLC, kind of like a investment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 LLC is perfectly adequate. I think it's just, it all really comes down to cost and efficiency for the individual investor. So we usually, when we're talking to clients, we say, how can we keep this most cost effective while still being effective from a legal and a tax perspective? Because we don't want to save money on the front end, but potentially cost you more on the back end. So it's kind of a moving target when we're talking with people.
I have a question, actually.
Yep.
In terms of, I know that, when we purchase properties, or a lot of investors choose to put their properties in an LLC to defer any liability, or so there's no exposure. My question is, when you said there's a lot, if you're planning to have a lot of properties, you might want to consider that. One, what do you consider a lot of properties? And I guess it's a two-part question. The second one, part of that is, at what point, if I'm planning to have 10 properties, am I okay that way? And I've also heard people throwing around using umbrella coverage as insurance to take off of that liability and then continue purchasing those properties in personal name. So I didn't know, since you guys do insurance, I figured you guys do umbrellas. I wonder if you can touch on that.
Yeah, so I guess the first piece is we are not insurance agents in the sense of, we don't do property and casualty, homeowners insurance, vehicle insurance, things like that. We mainly deal in life, disability, and long-term care insurances. But I will say that to kind of answer the questions in parts, it really depends on the individual circumstance. So a perfect example is, I have a client of mine that owns a landscaping business, and he also has rental real estate on the side. He has 10 properties, all of which he owns individually. Is that the most efficient structure? It works for him because he's properly insured. He has intentionally bought a lot of liability umbrella coverage to cover that. And he's not concerned with creditor liability, which is a whole different conversation. Separate, especially for someone, for example, who owns a business. If I own a business over here personally as maybe a sole proprietor, and I have these rental properties, now because I own all these assets in my name, something happens or goes wrong with one of them, now all of my other property is now exposed to additional liability there. So the reason to separate the two would be is if you're concerned about that. If you're not, then you don't necessarily need to have an LLC. it's not required by any means. I think that we typically recommend the path of least resistance in terms of how can we get you an efficient structure that's cost effective to you, that you can buy in conceptually to, is it the right amount of protection for the cost? So for some people, the cost of the additional insurance to cover some of their liability is cheaper than paying an attorney to set up all these legal documents to get this stuff in order for ownership purposes. So it's a balancing act between, it's kind of like a cost benefit analysis. How much is it going to cost me to do? And what's my benefit going to be in the long term? Either way, real estate is one of those unique things that if you own it in an LLC or you own it personally, it can still be transferred efficiently in both ways. One doesn't disqualify you from the other. So it's important to understand that there's no right answer to that question. I say that because that's a subjective answer. Like, that's my personal preference, but it's not always the right answer. For if it were me doing it, I would probably take that route, but not everyone views it the same way. So owning personally and doing the liability coverage, like you said, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you understand the risks, the positives and negatives to both structures, you can be right both ways.
All right, that is all we've got for questions today.
Sorry, Gene, do you have another question? I couldn't.
No, I'm sorry.
talking.
I was muted because I have little kids upstairs, so I don't want to ruin our feed. No, I really didn't have any questions, but would you do that for yourself? Like, would you do the LLC for yourself if you were doing it? Is that what you mean?
So me personally, yeah. And the reason is my partner and I, obviously, we have another company. Now I like to keep as much separation from what I consider business or investment activity and myself. So for me personally, I feel like that liability protection is worth it. Now, that's how we have our business set up. That's how I would probably have an investment property set up in that event. But again, that's I have to, just as a disclaimer, that's that's my personal preference, but everyone's different. Like I said, I have clients that do it both ways. And as long as there's risks, there's positives and negatives to each. So like if someone came to me and said, I want to do it this way, I would lay those out and do kind of a comparison between the two and say, this is how much it's going to cost to do this way. It's how much it's going to cost to do this way. And here's some of the hidden costs that are kind of like we don't know if it's going to happen to you, but if it does, this is what you're at risk for. And so then people make their decisions based on personal preferences at that point.
Awesome. That's an awesome answer to a complicated and with no real answer.
It sounds like I'm dancing around it, but there really is no right answer. I mean, you could ask an attorney, CPA, and other financial advisors, and we like to say to people that whatever you want to do, we'll make it work within our power. We can't promise that it's going to be nothing is ever perfect. I mean, no plan is perfect, but if we can make you as bulletproof as possible, that's where we lean. So
cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. And to everybody else, if any other questions pop up, you can reach Ryan, or you can reach out to me, and I'll make sure to connect you guys. And then I also just wanted to mention that, we at CR of Maryland have done what we can in these times. So we have turned virtual to continue to assist all of our clients. So I wanted to give a really huge shout out to the members of the team, to Melanie, Tom, Josh, Jean, Terry, to everybody. Everybody's out there doing a great job and just servicing everybody as much as we can. So just a shout out to everybody, and stay safe. And with that being said, I also wanted to mention that next week we're going to be focusing a little bit on home buying. So it's kind of like a home buying 101. So I'm kind of breaking it up into all different segments. So next week we'll have Jason Lerner from George Mason Mortgage. He's going to go over the pre-approval process and what I, really love about that whole thing is that he has this app that he's been using for a while now. And I feel like now more than ever, that's something that, we're going to go into on how really easy it is to get all of your information and everything in there. So that's going to be our topic for next week. So make sure to join us and have your questions ready. And as Laura mentioned earlier, on Thursday, Laura is going to be talking to the big CR. And I think that's it. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Ryan, Jean, and Laura, and Alyssa for getting all of this together. And we will see you guys next week, same time, same place. Well, actually, on Thursday with Laura.
Yeah, see you Thursday. Make sure you join in. And if you guys know anyone who would benefit from this webinar, we are going to be sending out the recording after this. So you can share the link to the recording. We can connect you with Ryan, and see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.